organizer, so I know how to project my voice. What I do for a living. You know how the black women always say, I'm the angry black woman? I'm the angry Palestinian woman. That's me. So I wasn't sure what to expect today when I went to visit Pillars in Southeast San Diego. I kind of had a feeling that it was going to be good work because Rumla wouldn't send me to somewhere that wasn't going to inspire me. But I just want everyone in this room to know that I have been moved to the deepest of my core in a way that has transformed me as someone who myself works with formerly incarcerated individual and so inspired by the people that I met today at Pillars and the work that they are doing. And I just want to say to the folks at Pillars that for me, it's love at first sight. And I am committed to you, and I would, moving forward, even from my presence at Pillars today, that I want to be your ally all the way on the other side of the country, and I want to be your ambassador in every room that I am in this country to ensure that the work that you're doing that is so grassroots and so rooted in actual human beings and real life experiences is modeled in every corner of this country. So I love you, Pillars. I love all your people. I'm so moved. And you might have thought that I was coming to give you something. I'm leaving Southeast San Diego with a lot more than I had when I got here. So I want to take you on a little journey and kind of put us where we are in this kind of country and the moment that we are in, where we need to go and how we kind of put Pillars at the center of it. And I think Pillars is a reminder of the potential that we have as a country in the moment that we are in right now. I know a lot of people in our country were feeling really disappointed. People felt some despair. People felt betrayed. People felt a lot of negative things on that very dreadful day, on Election Day of 2016. I felt a lot of those things too for a few minutes. But then I started feeling what I was feeling before November 8th. I was feeling perpetual outrage. And one of the things that was really outraging me about the election and the response to the election was that the very thing that really outraged people, it wasn't Donald Trump that introduced them to me. Donald Trump didn't introduce sexism or misogyny. He did not introduce anti-black racism or xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, none of the phobias or isms. And maybe we needed a Donald Trump, right, to put us in a position where we feel what marginalized communities in this country have felt, some for centuries and others for decades in this country. And a lot of really bad stuff has happened just within the past 10 months, and just under this administration. Anywhere from rescinding DACA, which, as you know, is a program that has legalized 800,000 young people in our country, 40,000 whom live here in San Diego, and has put them and their families at fear of deportation. So 800,000, by extension, almost 12 million of our family members, of our neighbors, of our friends, of our colleagues, literally living in uncertainty and fear in this country. We have had Muslim ban 1, Muslim ban 2, Muslim ban 3, now we're at Muslim ban 4. We are in a situation right now where we have legalized discrimination of LGBTQ people in government positions at the hands of our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who was too racist to be a judge, but could be the top cop of the United States of America. We have dropped the mother of all bombs, they call them. I don't like mothers to be never should mothers be coinciding with anything that has to do with war, because mothers are nurturers, they are people who give life. But we did bomb Afghanistan within the last 10 months. We also killed 200 civilians in Iraq in the deadliest airstrike since 2003. We have watched our administration engage in very problematic and dangerous rhetoric against Muslim communities. We have seen our administration try to ban trans people from the military. And for those of you who want to say, well, I'm anti-war anyway, it ain't about the military. It's if you can ban any group of people from anywhere, then you start with one and you just go down the list. So if you don't stand for the first group, don't complain when they come for you next. So there's a lot of, we're living under fascism is basically where I'm going here. We're under an administration that doesn't care about you or me. They care about only people in power. They have emboldened racists in this country in a way we've never seen before. We could even take it back, because back in the days, they used to have their hoods on. There was some shame in their racism, but now they have their hoods off and they are not afraid to walk around communities and chant things like Jews can't replace us, and literally put forth their true agenda that we knew they always had, which is they want this nation to be a white supremacist nation, and we're here to say, definitely not on our generation's watch. Now, people ask me all the time, why do I do this work? Why am I here? Why do I stand here? And people see me, I'm an unapologetic Muslim American woman. I'm unapologetically progressive. I'm unapologetically Palestinian. But even within all that, it's really because I'm Muslim. And in this country, they always need a group, right? They always need to scapegoat. You gotta have a group to blame things on, right? You gotta find a group that creates a sense of fear amongst the people so that they can justify different policies and things. So you can say, oh, I guess I could get down with that because I know those Muslims over there are really, really dangerous people. And what we've been taught in this country is that Islam is some foreign religion, that it belongs on the other side of the world. And I know many of you know a lot of Muslims, and I may be preaching to the choir, but it's really important for me to kind of contextualize how I think about Islam and how I think about myself and my journey as a Muslim in this country. I'm born Muslim. Other people choose to be Muslim. There's different ways to be a Muslim. And what people need to understand about why I'm so unapologetically Muslim is because I actually believe that I have no other choice but to be unapologetically Muslim. I also believe that I deserve to be unapologetically Muslim in a country that says we were founded on religious freedom. But even more so than that, Islam has been on the shores of these United States before it was called the United States of America. We came here as expeditionists. We explored this country before there was a Christopher Columbus. And then a couple of centuries later, about 25% of enslaved Africans who were forced from Africa to come here were Muslim. They were people stripped of their culture. Some of them were forced into conversions to Christianity. But there were some Muslims that held on. And I say to myself all the time, as a Muslim in this country in 2017, and we always talk about Islamophobia like that's the issue. Islamophobia ain't on the top of my list, just so that we're very clear in this room. I always think to myself, how is it that an enslaved African Muslim figured out how to be Muslim in this country under the watch of a slave master? I want to understand how an enslaved Muslim who was tortured, their wives and daughters raped, people who were probably left to starve and were whipped, still believed that there was God. So if you could be an enslaved person and still believe that there was a God that was watching over you somewhere, then we have no choice but to be in this moment and carry on a legacy of a people that sacrificed more than any of you will ever sacrifice in this room. I don't care what your story is. You can never, ever experience what ancestors and Muslims in this country had to deal with under the watch of a white supremacist agenda that has been here since the days of the founding of this nation, not just under a Trump administration. So for me, that is why I'm unapologetically Muslim. And that is why my Palestinian immigrant parents who came here in the 1970s and many after the 1967 war, our Pakistani grandparents who came here to go to medical school, or people from Lebanon who came here after the Lebanese Civil War, you didn't just come to this country and show up and be like, I'm Muslim. There was somebody before you who sacrificed for you to be here in this room today. So that is my inspiration and why I know that I have to be unapologetically Muslim, because somebody before me was unapologetically Muslim. And it is why I can stand here before you today and speak of their legacy. Oftentimes when Muslims find themselves in a situation like the one that we just had in New York, the immediate reaction of Muslims is we gotta be really apologetic. We gotta stand up, gather the podium, and we all wanna stand together and condemn terrorism as Muslims. This is my frame. I will not ever condemn an act of terror as a Muslim. I will condemn acts of terror against anybody as a human being first and foremost. We as Muslims have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. We have everything to be proud of as Muslims in this country. We follow a beautiful faith, and we don't need anybody else to define who we are and what we believe. We define what we believe and who we are. Something that a lot of Muslims say, and if it's coupled with something else, it's fine, but when you say it by itself, it bothers me. Muslims will say, Islam is a religion of peace. And that's it. For me personally, I believe all Abrahamic faiths are religions of peace. I believe that's why religion was brought to this earth, right? To bring peace amongst the people. What is more important to me about Islam is that Islam is actually a religion of justice. And that is why I do this work. I don't do this work just because I believe that Islam is a religion of peace. I don't really feel like I'm adding anything to the conversation. We do this work because our faith is rooted in justice. And oftentimes in the Muslim community, I go to a lot of lectures and people will say, everybody wants to teach us the life of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be on him. And that's cool. And that's important. But they always, for me at least, leave out the important parts. They teach us the characteristics and mannerisms of this very important man. And what I always tell people that if you are a Muslim, then you are inherently an activist. There is no distinction between Muslim and activism. You don't do this because activism is cool. It's actually, in fact, called upon you as a Muslim to engage in social justice. In fact, in Islam, they tell us, or we are taught, that you must stand up against injustice, even if it's against your own parents. Imagine that. The people who gave you life, you are allowed to stand up against your own parents if your parents are engaging in an act of injustice. That's my religion, right? And when people talk about the life of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessing be upon him, what he was, in fact, was, yes, he was a prophet, but he was actually a human rights activist. He was actually an anti-racist activist. He literally, his whole message was that just because you're white doesn't make you better than a black person. Just because you're Arab doesn't make you better than a white person, right? That was his full message. That in Islam, we are all equal, we are all the creations of God, and the only hierarchy in Islam is based on how good and pious you are. That's the only hierarchy we have. So the better you are, the more of a good person you are, that's how we rank people, not by their race or their ethnicity or where they came from or where they geographically live. I remember actually I learned this one time. I heard Imam Taha say this at a place that I was at with him. We were talking, there was a conversation about workers' rights, right? And I know that, a lot of people work on campaigns for raising the living wage or when you're talking about labor. And I remember him reciting a hadith, basically a saying by our Prophet that said that, very simple, pay the worker before the sweat on his forehead dries. Those are the words of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him. So you could argue, and I will argue, that my Prophet was a worker rights activist. He also talked about the welcoming of the stranger, right? He was an immigrants' rights activist. He was also a feminist in his own right. I don't care what the opposition has to say about my Prophet, about how many wives he had, and taking our religion out of historical context, right? He was a staunch supporter of the education of women. He married an older woman who had more money than him, who had more education than him. He was a man who treated women with the utmost dignity and respect. That is my beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him. He was also an environmental justice activist. He truly believed that everything around us, from the trees, from the water, from the earth, are blessings from God, and it is our responsibility to be stalwarts of the earth, right? So when Muslims aren't part of the environmental justice movement, that's not the environmental justice movement's problem to invite you to the movement. That is, in fact, your religious obligation to be taking care of the earth that Allah has blessed around you, right? When I think about pretty much any issue, animal rights, right? Animals are creations of God. So really, with us as Muslims, this idea of activism seems to be some new phenomenon, but in fact, it is inherently who we're supposed to be. If you want to be a true good Muslim, a whole Muslim, you have to be active and actively engaged on alleviating suffering and injustice that is around you. Because one day, I will say to the Muslims in the room, and other people of faith may have similar concepts, you're going to answer for it. You are going to be asked, where were you when unarmed young black men and women were being killed at the hands of law enforcement? Where were you? Where were you when our Central American and South Asian and East Asian sisters and brothers were being deported and separated from their families? Where were you when that was happening? Where were you when people were stripping us of our health care and people could literally die on our watch? Where were you? What were you doing in those moments? Where were you when there were brothers coming out of prison who are formerly incarcerated and were looking for some open arms and embracement? Where were you, sisters and brothers? What were you doing? Were you taking care of my creation? So I just want to say to the folks in the room, you all better have some good answers. And a good part of that answer could be I was helping pillars. I was down with pillars. I don't know, that's what I'm going to say. I'm just saying. Now, so that was my lecture for the Muslims. And the other thing about just for the Muslims, and I end with this for the Muslim folks, is the last thing that I like to hear when I go into a Muslim space where someone says, you know what, Sister Linda, like, I don't like to do politics. I don't like to be political. And what I will say to Muslims in this room, that if you woke up this morning and you were breathing, you're political. You have no choice but to be political in this country right now. This country has politicized you, politicized the communities that you come from, and has politicized your faith. So you have no choice but to defend your communities, to stand up for what is right, because you are put in that situation right now. There's no way out for you. So Muslims and politics are all one thing right now. So there is no Muslim that can say to me, Sister Linda, I can't be political. If you're alive today, you are political in my opinion. So let's move on from that a little bit. Now, I'm in a moment right now, and folks know, by the way, just to be clear here, I get criticized from all the way from the right to all the way to the left and everybody in between. And I actually don't care. And the reason why I say that, to you is because when you are doing what you believe is right from the deepest of your heart, I don't care what anybody has to say about it. If you got a better idea, then roll up your sleeves and show up and do something better than I can do, right? We have to understand that the work that we are doing, the work that we all choose to do, is not about impressing people. I'm not out here to impress people. I'm out here to do what I believe is right. You don't got to agree with what I'm doing. You don't have to agree with my tactic or strategy. You don't have to agree with the way that I choose to communicate. But you can't deny the impact that I've had on the work that I do because I'm so unapologetic about it. And the reason why I say that is that oftentimes people do certain things based on the current frame that is offered to you, right? So we actually worry about what other people think about us. I worry about what God thinks about me. That's all I care about, right? I don't care what anybody else has to say about what I'm doing. And the reason why I say that is we also tend to forget a lot of moments in our history and leaders who came before us. And I'm going to use one that is used often just because they're a universal figure. Let's take Dr. Martin Luther King as an example, right? Dr. Martin Luther King, everybody's like, oh my God, we have a monument up of him in Washington, D.C. We got a day off in January. For God's sakes, even the opposition quotes Dr. Martin Luther King, so you know there's a problem. And the reason why this is important to remember in how we do bold work, like the work Pillars does and who Pillars chooses to work with and for, is that Dr. Martin Luther King isn't the Dr. Martin Luther King that everybody thinks is Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King was, in fact, labeled one of the most dangerous men in America by then former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. He was called a communist. The organizations that he organized with were blacklisted by the US government, right? Dr. Martin Luther King was a victim of police brutality. He wrote you letters from the Birmingham jail. So I don't understand why Dr. Martin, everybody's like organized like Dr. Martin Luther King. I was like, well, shoot, we're trying over here, but you guys are telling us that he was doing something else when we know, in fact, what he was a black radical revolutionary. That's who Dr. Martin Luther King was. So what I'm saying to you in this room is that it may take 40 years for people to realize who you really were and remember that you are on the right side of history, but we can't worry about what people think right now. Someday, somebody's gonna walk down Colin Kaepernick Boulevard, but then 50 years ago, they were like tearing up Colin Kaepernick. That's just how it is in this country. So what I'm saying to you, sometimes we just gotta be bold in the moment and don't worry about what the consequences are. Something else that's really important to me in the work that I do, and we fall short sometimes. And I'll take this a little bit back to our Prophet and what he taught us as Muslims. And I'm sure that all of us who are people of faith, and even those of faith that don't believe in God, might have some similar type of inspirational stories. The people that inspire us most weren't the people that were trying to have access to power, right? When you were looking for my Prophet, he was sitting with the poor. He was with the most marginalized people. He chose to be with the most oppressed before he was in places of power. And he could have had a lot of access to power, but that's not where his heart was, right? So for me, in the work that we are all doing today, and why I'm so moved by the work of Pillars, is because they align directly in my philosophy and how we organize and build, and how Muslim communities and all communities need to build. I believe, and it's why I think we're in the situation that we're in, because we haven't done this in the right way. Those who are closest to the pain, those closest to the trauma, those closest to the problem are what? Closest to the solution. Yes. That's it. Yes. If you have never been incarcerated, if you have never been poor, if you have never been undocumented, if you have never been vilified or demonized, if you have never been stopped by a police officer, if you have never been beaten by a police officer, if you have never been discriminated against, then you cannot lead a strategy or lead a campaign about how people are supposed to alleviate their suffering. It just doesn't work. We also, and I'm trying to get Pillars out of this a little bit after I leave this, I understand what it means to organize from a place of deep principles, to pick and choose who you take your money from. I understand that, and that's important. But it's not Pillars that gotta change, it's the people with the money who gotta change. Why should somebody, or why should a group of people or an organization that is already doing transformative and important work with the most marginalized people gotta change what they're doing so they can satisfy your dollars that you're giving them? How does that make sense? Why would we even ask organizations to do that? Also, people with money. Why would we put specific measurements of success on transforming people's hearts and minds? How do you measure that? How do you measure people's hearts? How do you measure somebody who went from feeling discarded by a community and now feeling embraced and loved, is empowering others? Somebody tell me, how do you write that down in a chart somewhere? And that's the problem in the way that we keep putting forth this work, is that we put organizations like Pillars in a situation where they're gonna say to you, thanks, but no thanks. And then continue to struggle for resources by trying to find those very special individuals who are going to believe in the work that they are gonna do and put that money forward. So let's help Pillars not have to do that. And I will say to people in this room, one of the things that inspires me about Islam is not that it's just a religion of peace, or that it's also a religion of justice, which is very important to me, but it's actually a religion of forgiveness. Our God is Al-Ghafur, the most forgiving. So if our God could be the most forgiving, how can we not forgive his creations for making mistakes? People make mistakes. People do things that they regret. Sometimes people live in a society, because of our negligence, causes people to make mistakes over and over again because they got no other choice. When people have to feed their families, when people have to pay their rent, they will do anything by any means necessary. And any one of us in this room have ever been put in that position to protect our children, to ensure our children had what they needed. We would do anything. One of the beautiful things about Islam too is that we are not God to judge people. And people make choices based on their circumstances. And I remember a story about forgiveness. There was a prostitute who saw, this is in the days of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessing be upon him. There was a prostitute who saw a thirsty dog. She took a shoe and she filled it with water, and she basically gave it to the thirsty dog. And Allah forgave her. So if Allah can see people in their humanity, no matter who they are and what choices that they make, why can't we? Why can't we? I just have a hard time believing that we are being whole people if we can't see the humanity in all people. And I also want to understand, how are we whole people when we live in a country that is not the most highly populated country in the world, but you live in a country with the largest prison population in the world by far of any country. And it's not okay. We should be ashamed in this country that people, politically corrupt people like Manafort, a white man who probably hurt more people than any black man who's in there on some drug offense, because he can't have a good lawyer or because his family can't put a bail for him, he has to spend years in prison away from his children and family. But somebody with just some means, just some dollars in his pocket, could walk away from our justice system. That is not right. That is not right. It is not right. So, one of the things that I felt today at Pillars, which is more important for me than the words that people said to me there, than the stories that I heard, which were all moving, ask yourself this question. And it's based on something that I'm going to paraphrase that Maya Angelou said. She said, it's not important the words that you use. What's important is how you make people feel. And when I was in Pillars today, I was expecting to make people feel a certain way. But what I left feeling is inspired. I may not remember everybody's name. I may not remember all the moving stories. But what I will remember about Pillars is that I was moved to the deepest of my core. I was brought to tears in a way that I haven't in a really long time. I understood at that moment what it means to love people unconditionally, regardless of what their life circumstances has brought to their doorsteps. I felt reconciliation and forgiveness and a restoration of humanity that I haven't felt in a really long time. And imagine if Pillars just had a little bit more resources. Not even a lot more, just a little bit more resources. The fact that the type of love that was in that room, not just the love that Pillars as an institution was showing those folks that were there, but the love that they were showing to each other, the support that they have, because they all come from the same place. They have the same experiences. They can actually tell each other, I know how you feel. Not when someone else tries to tell you, I know you, if you've never been incarcerated, don't tell somebody, I know how you feel. Or if you've never been poor, don't tell somebody, I know how you feel. But in that space, it was a place of reaffirmation of people's life choices and the fact that they have been given maybe a second, a third, a fourth chance. Because I believe people deserve as many chances as our hearts are willing to give them. So what I'll end by saying to all of you is there's a quote that has moved me in this work. So my faith moves me, but there's a quote by an Aboriginal woman by the name of Leela Watson. And she said something so profound, and I organized from this place. And she said, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you believe that your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And what I will say to you, that as long as we have over 2.2 million people in prison cells across this country, that number doesn't even include undocumented immigrants in immigration detention centers, that as long as there are people, some of whom are innocent, some of whom have made bad mistakes, are sitting in prison cells, as long as there are people in our communities who do not feel free to walk in the streets of their community without being stopped by a police officer or even killed by a police officer, as long as there are people amongst us who are undocumented who fear leaving home and not being able to return every day, as long as a Muslim sister in hijab feels vulnerable in spaces where there may be other people who don't look like her, when people around you do not feel free and are not free, then none of you are free. Yeah. Only until everybody's free are we all free. So I say to all of you today, And I will make my own financial commitment as a consistent supporter of Pillars because that's how much I believed in it. I believe in it to the point where I would not ask you to do something that I myself am not willing to do right now. So I know Sheikh Taha is going to come up here and shake your pockets down. But I want you to know that, and for those Muslims who understand the concept of charity, there has never been a time that I have given to an organization that sincerely does good work that God did not repay me that donation 20 times over. Or maybe God didn't give it to me back financially, but he gave it back to me in good health. Maybe God protected my mother from a potential situation because I gave that act of charity. Maybe God's protecting my 3 children, high achievers in school, even though they hardly see me. Maybe God blessed me with those kids because of these acts of charity, of supporting those doing the good work that I believe is God's work. So think about something in your life that you want to protect yourself from. Think about somebody that you love and give with the intention of saying, please God, protect my loved ones with this donation that I'm going to put on Pillars today. And Muslims know this very well, unless anybody knows otherwise. I have never met a Muslim that got poor from giving a donation to a good organization. That's just not how charity works. That's just not how it works. So I say to you in this room, be as generous as possible. I promise you that God is in total approval of your donation today. And I promise you, whatever you thought about giving me when you got here, so if you were like, I got this number in my mind and this is what I'm giving, trust me on this, sisters and brothers, just give a little bit more than you were intending to give today. And I just want to say, may God bless the leaders of Pillars. May God bless every single individual who walks through your doors. May God protect them from the ills and injustices of this society. May he continue to put them on a lighted path away from going back to anywhere that will take away from them the dignity that they deserve every single day that they are on this earth. Thank you very much, everyone.